create an inviting, engaging, and interactive environment. Again, keyword create. Why have I honed in on create? Why have I honed in on that word create?
As the meeting leader, you can actually control that. It's up to you to create that environment.
Yeah, you know, a lot of times, and I've heard this from many, many managers and leaders that I've worked with over the years, say, you know, I just can't get these guys talking. I just can't get the motivation happening. And I'm not saying that it's always on the shoulders of the team leader, but I'm going to say probably 80% of the time it is. We don't realize sometimes, I said, that we can be our own worst enemy when it comes to creating passive environments. That we really can, and it's a really challenging thing. And for people to want to engage and participate, they have to feel what? This is nothing new, but they have to feel what? Valued and motivated. One more. Comfort. Yeah, safe. Right? If they feel that they're going to throw out an idea or throw out a suggestion and then they get shot down, it's like, okay, thank you very much. I won't be saying anything more in these meetings. And sometimes, if you're aware of the dynamics within a meeting room, you can watch people and just watch their body language go from this open body language, and then they have this great idea to, what planet were you on when you came up with that idea? All of a sudden you see I exaggerate a little bit, but you just sort of see them, oh, okay. And not only does it close down that one person, what else does it do? Everybody goes, hey, see what he did to Bill? The hell with that? Excuse my language. I'm not going to be doing that. I'm not saying anything. I'll just sit in the corner, work on my BlackBerry, and I'll be good to go. So we create this in many cases. How do we do it? That's the challenge. How do we do it? Well, how do we avoid this passive participant syndrome? Something I've used for years, simple. Rule the first 5 minutes. This is all over, what page do you have?
11.
Page 11. Rule the first 5 minutes. And it's real simple, is you want to get people meaningfully engaged in that first 5 minutes of a meeting. Meaningfully engaged is the key word. Now people say, what is meaningfully engaged? Well, thank God we're not in the 80s and 90s anymore, where people like myself and various other trainers and facilitators got hold of those books about how games that you can play at the beginnings of meetings to get people involved. Nothing wrong with games and fun. And have you ever been involved in any of those? Yeah, a few of those. Right? Now, sometimes they work great, in all fairness. Right? At conferences and stuff, they can have some fun with them, there's no doubt. But for business meetings, you have to watch what you do to engage people early on. And again, if you violate that safe rule, making me feel a little bit kind of silly in front of my peers, I always think back to, and again, I detail this in the book, but it was back in literally probably the early 90s, and it was like a $100 seminar, one of the hotels by the airport, and it was, team building for intact business teams or something along that line. $99 for the day, go on out. So I'm there with 200 people in the room, and thinking, okay, should be good. I'm kind of just getting into this business, pick up a few tips, pick up a few techniques. So a facilitator comes out, immaculately dressed, nice suit, the whole thing. He goes, okay, what I'd like you to do first of all is everyone reach under their chair. Okay? Now, you don't want to reach under those chairs, guaranteed. We navigate through the gum and various other assorted sundry items, and it came up with an envelope that was stuck on the bottom of my chair. I pulled out the envelope, and the envelope was a little slip of paper. The slip of paper said, row, row, row your boat. Any clue what I had to do?
Sing a song.
Oh, yeah. I had to get up with other 100 people. Now, there was 5 different songs around the room. Right, so row, row your boat, Michael, row your boat. Sure, it was a rowing theme or something. I'm not sure what it was. Anyways, bottom line is we all had to stand up and in unison, debatable, sing that song and find our intact group and then kind of sing in unison. And then, you saw how all of a sudden the unison came as we all sang together. No, I was sitting beside a guy, I think that was a mining manager at Income. In the session, I got to know him, and I can't repeat what he said to me, but it was something around like, you expect me to go back up to Copper Cliff and bring this into my mind when we start a meeting, you're yes. Okay. Thank God that stuff has gone away for the most part. Nothing wrong with games and fun, don't get me wrong, but how we get people engaged early on is important. So let me throw the question out to you, because my esteemed colleagues, how do you get people meaningfully engaged in the first 5 minutes of meetings? It's not that challenging, really. How do we get them engaged? Sorry?
Eye contact?
Simple thing is having some eye contact.
I do a round table, like introduce everybody.
So if it's the first meeting,
like, who's on the line from Toronto, who's in Waterloo,
right?
Bring that togetherness.
Especially important if it's a teleconference
Yeah,
or WebEx type of thing. Absolutely. What else? Let's say this is a monthly meeting. What do you tend to do at monthly meetings? Yeah, I know, you meet. But what do you tend to do at monthly meetings?
Oh, check in and see where
Check
you
in
are.
and see where people
Yeah.
are and whatever. Okay, so instead of structuring me talking for the first 40 minutes, and therefore putting people to sleep, what can we do instead in terms of restructuring?
Just see where everyone is on their action items.
Yeah, go to the people first and say, where are we on? Let's do our round table first versus at the end, right? Let's throw a question out first of all for the group to discuss. We know we've had this initiative come through the organization last week. I'd like to spend 5 minutes and that's it. Let's just get sort of the gut reaction from each of our departments. How's this sort of rolling out in your departments? So get the input part in before you're going to do the output, which is what we normally do. The natural thing is we do the output part and sort of lull people into sleep because it's a lot like physics, grade 12 physics, for those who remember grade 12 physics. But it is. It's that whole idea of inertia and action and reaction. You get people sitting and rooting to their chairs without any involvement either intellectually or vocally. It's that much more difficult 30 minutes in to get them off that structure. You get them involved early. Sometimes people groan a little bit about saying, oh, geez, I haven't even had my first coffee. These guys got to be a talk and do some discussions. But you know what? It's easier to keep it going. It's sort of like the rock that's embedded into the earth that there takes so much momentum if you let it sit. But once you've got it off its axis, you can kind of just, and it kind of rolls. It's easier to keep it rolling versus letting it sit in the sediment for 40 minutes. To use a bad analogy, one step further. but you know what I'm saying? It is a law of physics. And I have found if you can get people engaged early, and whether it be meetings, training, whatever it is, it's a heck of a lot easier to keep them going. So again, by asking some open-ended questions, getting some quick group discussion, from getting some input versus output to start, you're well on your way. You're well on your way. It just takes a little bit of creativity. Yes?
One of the things that we've started to do with, we have a weekly kind of, just everybody had offices together for 15 minutes on Monday mornings. And it got to be a real social thing that would stretch on and on. It was crazy. So now it's a stand-up meeting. There's no chairs.
Right.
You stand up. People are in, out, they don't.
Yeah.
It works great.
Yep.
Simple change. We're done in 10 minutes instead of 45.
Perfect. And it's just sometimes simple things like that. It's funny. I know I worked with, I think it was the region of Durham way back when, and worked with the works guys. And once again, these are guys that are out with the snow plows and whatever. And the same thing. They're not going to have meetings in situations like this. And that's one of the guys that we have it every Friday morning, 20 minutes around the trucks, coffee in hand. But we actually have a structure. We open it up. We talk with the group. We figure out where we're going for the next week, and we go. Because it just doesn't work sitting in a room and moving on. And you got to mix it up a little bit. One of the training companies where I was a partner in many years ago, we started to do the same thing, a weekly meeting just of our core group. And we do things like health and safety updates, which was really, but it got kind of funny after a while, because we were a small office of 6 people in an office. The health and safety updates were like, well, I think Bill got a paper cut. Yeah, did you update the first aid kit? Yeah, we're good. Okay, move on, next item. So that was cool for the first few months. It got but you had to move it. You had to switch it up, because after a while it sort of became, okay, now this is being done just for the sake of doing it. And that's what we want to stay away from, as we've said. Simple things. Now again, I can't do it unfortunately in this sort of group unless we have the big name cards, but whenever I do any training sessions or large group sessions where I'm with the group for a time, we have the names and we use the names. And I'll go and people say, well, when you use people's names, aren't you putting them on the spot? No, not if you're going with the last bullet, which is you use the questions as discussion devices, not oral exams. There's a real art to asking good questions in meetings that will get involvement and engagement without putting people on the spot. And simple ones. A lot of times you know the people in the meetings. Bill, based on your experience, can you share? Donna, I know you've worked with this IT group for ages. That might help out some of the new folks in the room with a little bit of information. The way you use questions to kind of pump it up a little bit and to make them feel that, hey, I want to participate. And I've used that technique for 20 years probably. with 10,000 participants of various types of training, I've never had anyone sort of go, whoa, you put me on the spot. You know, so and the name personalizes it as well. Again, it was somewhat challenging. Again, I think lots of stories, but I was in Russia last March doing an innovation meeting between two big companies, and I thinking ahead, we had tent cards out for the 8 people, our Russian comrades that were there with the names, and I started using names and went, wow, I can't pronounce one of them. So the trick is, if you're going to use people's names, pronounce them correctly, or probably just don't use the cards, because I taught myself that I needed to do okay, let me practice this a few times, let alone when I was in Kuwait. It was a bit of a challenge as well, but we got through it. But people appreciate the fact that you take the time to utilize a name if it's done correctly. So simple stuff. Again, not rocket science. These are the little things that make people want to engage. David. Spend a day on this. We're not going to. Use and abuse of PowerPoint. How many people here use PowerPoint for meetings? Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, that's all. Well, it's not bad. So what else? If you don't use PowerPoint, what else are you using or not? Handouts? Flip charts? Whiteboards? Okay. Great tool. Don't get me wrong. I'm not here dissing PowerPoint by any stretch, but it's also an abused tool. It really is. And what happens is you have an inexperienced presenter / meeting facilitator. What tends to happen is, well, I don't want to forget what I'm going to be talking about or leading the meeting. So what I'll do is I'll take that, and that's a good page. So I'm going to, I'll kind of just transpose that onto a PowerPoint slide. And, well, that's a good page too, so I better do that. And then what ends up happening is you've got a 45-page policy and procedure manual verbatim up here. And then even that in itself is not a bad thing, but what does it lead to? Because when it's up there like that, what am I going to do? I'm going to read it. Now people start to get upset. Right? Now people start to leave whether the coffee pot is full or not. Right? That's what tends to happen. So, a couple little tips. Let me just check my time. No, we're good. We're good. Any need for that? No. Absolutely not. That's why I put it in. Any need for that? Absolutely not. Is that okay, that slide? No. No. I'm dismayed. Really? Yeah, what's wrong with that?
Font's too small.
Font's too small.
Too many colors.
Too many colors.
Too many words.
Too many words. Too busy. Oh, come on with these guys in the corner. That really adds to it, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
I'm being a little facetious. Hopefully your slides don't look this, but you'd be surprised the amount of people I work with where they say, well, no, nothing wrong with that. Nice and colorful. No, it's not. You do not need to, because you have the PowerPoint 2007 version, you do not need to use every single function in one PowerPoint slide. You don't need to use every single one. Take it from me. If you're going to use PowerPoint for words primarily, which is what we do, a few tips, and this is in your book, and again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but have a contrast between background. I mean, I made it very obvious here, black on white, doesn't have to be that stark, but, generally the general 20 is probably 28 font. No more than 4 to 6 points vertically. Just need reminders. You don't need full-blown sentences. They're there. They are hopefully there. The points are there to create discussion. That's where they're hopefully there to create discussion. So if you're going to discuss it, you don't need to put it verbatim what you want to talk about. I sometimes put that and go, geez, I don't want to insult people's intelligence. But the amount of shows that I see that are all in uppercase because it's easier to read supposedly. No, it's not. And again, the reason we have them drop in, or some cases, is so we can focus. And then plus I got just nailed so big in my 4th-year business course at Western by the professor because I had all my bullets come up like this. I think it created a little bit of a phobia, actually, because she said, you put all the bullets at the same time in your presentation. I think I got dashed a lot of marks for that. Oh. And so I kind of, thanks for sharing. Let me share it that way. But yeah, one at a time. One at a time. So whether that's a good rule or not, I don't know, but it's therapy for me. So where possible, though, and again, I know you can't always do this in meetings, but if it's the purpose for this is, again, remember, PowerPoint, like everything else, is a visual aid. Okay, is there to aid the presenter, not replace the presenter. Someone told me that many years ago and it stuck with me. Visual aid. It's there to aid the presenter, not replace the presenter. I find if I can use things, visuals, images, graphs, metaphors, analogies, process flows, they're the sort of things that stick more. More pictorial based, in other words, is what I find is a general rule where you can't always do that. I understand that. But you know what, if you're trying to present a new model within the organization where there's a 6-point model, instead of having 6 bullet points, even using process flow box and how they build within the organization, that creates a mental picture, creates a model. And research has shown it's much more likely they're going to remember and retain that information after the actual meeting session. So it's not just kind of do it because it's a neat thing to do. It actually aids with retention and recall down the line. And again, we won't go into too much detail, but I mean, I just got some simple, people have probably seen this situational leadership, been around for years. I teach some of this stuff. This model, and I just build it. And this is probably about a 3-hour training session to get to that point. Right now, if I just showed you that, there's a lot of stuff. But as I build it and talk it, so again, and if I figure out how to do this on PowerPoint, you can figure out how to do it. It's not that difficult. It really isn't. 15 minutes on a tutorial and you've got this stuff figured out. I'm not saying you do this for everything, but where there's some value that's going to keep people involved and that's going to help them retain, you might want to give some thought. That's how it finishes up. There we go. Unnecessary noise. Presentation skills questionnaire results. That's kind of dead. That's better. They stop there. I made my point about useless audio clips. That says a lot more. If I'm a presenter, I go back and say, well, let's talk a little bit about this. It's going to do it one more time. Sorry for that. Guys, really what I want to focus on today after our results of our questionnaire, which, by the way, you didn't do, is that doesn't tell me anything. This I can say, we're really going to focus, based on this graph, on this 4th agenda, which is how do we meet audience needs. That tells me something. Okay, that's a visual that tells me something. Now, it's not stunning. I don't know how much I'm going to remember that, but it's a lot easier for me and for you to comprehend. Simple, straightforward stuff. Quick meeting tips. Positioning to facilitate interaction. So on this whole interaction mode. We sometimes, it depends how many people are at our meetings. How many people on average are at our meetings? Let me just get a couple numbers thrown out. 8 people, 10, 7, 6. Okay, that kind of 5 to 10 number. Again, I don't know if you set it up this way. I prefer to set it up this way. I mean, if we were a smaller training group, it'd be set up that way. We can't with this sort of forum. And again, big part of it is the peripheral vision. Right? If I keep people within that peripheral vision, it's a lot easier to keep people engaged. You can't sort of metaphorically hide. I don't mean that in a negative way, but with this sort of setup, it allows for a lot more interaction, especially when you use names, when you use those questions, when you use the other things we've talked about already and combine it with a little bit of the interaction, or the choreography as I like to call it, it can go a long way. You have to watch, don't come in too close, because you want to respect the space. If you go out too far, then you might as well be lecturing. So there is a little bit of an art form to this, and I'm sort of, again, doing the Reader's Digest version of this sort of conversation that I normally have. What we would normally do in a case like this, if we're talking to a person, the natural thing, so if I was talking to Michelle, if I was talking to Michelle, the normal thing would be, if we were that sort of setup, would be I'd walk towards her. Problem is, in a small meeting, if I walk towards her, what will my voice automatically do?
You'll drop your voice to me.
I'll drop my voice, she'll drop my voice, no one else can hear. And so one of the things I always say to people is, you actually move away in this sort of thing. You move away from that person, because that keeps the peripheral vision, people engaged, and it keeps the voices up. It's counterintuitive. The natural thing is to do this. It's like, oh, no, move it back. Move it back. Do enough of it, and you do it naturally. Small tips, nothing major. Add these ones together. These things all create that facilitative, participative feel. You have to be a little careful. Yeah, you have to be a little careful if you've got those long U meeting setups, or because again, the challenge for this is, you kind of go right down the runway, and once you do that, these people over here, once you spend time with these people over here and these people over here, do what? Disengage. Out comes the blackberries, etc., etc. Right? That's so this can work. Just be careful that you don't get caught up into that. Even for a small meeting where we use those traditional boardrooms. I really screw up people when I go in and I run small classes or facilitation sessions in these, because I always set up on the side. And people kind of go, what are you doing here, Tony? Like, go to the end of the table. That's where you're supposed to be. I said, no, I have my reasons. I've got my reasons. I just find that it has that different feel, The end of the table is kind of what? Mentally. It's the boss, it's the chair, it's the cheese, it's kind of the power position. If you're trying to create that safe, participative type of feeling and engagement, I'm not saying that's the only thing that's going to do that, but by just moving it around a little bit, I tend to find that does have a difference in the dynamics. It's these little small little nuances sometimes that can make a real big difference in your meetings. I'm going to finish off with, I believe, I'm going to finish off with, then, and we've kind of alluded to this a little bit, how important then really is trust in reoccurring type meetings, in reoccurring team meetings. Why? You're right, very. Why?
Expectations?
Expectations
Well, it creates that safe environment.
creates that safe environment, right? It creates that safe environment. And I could give you regale you with tons of stories, and you can probably regale me with tons of stories. That it's one of those things that if this is an ongoing team that you're working with, the level of trust, that's what on the axis on the side, the level of trust should build up over time. All they need is what's called a trust-breaking event, and that could be one of many things. It doesn't even have to be meeting-based. And it drops drastically. And you find people clam up in the meetings, find people don't want to engage, you don't want to participate. It is, especially on the ongoing type of meetings. One-off meetings, not as critical. Ongoing team meetings, trust is a critical part of that. And I find that if you've done a lot of the things that we've talked about today, that trust does build in time with those ongoing groups. So, in closing, purpose, and make sure it's communicated. Again, if you don't know, guaranteed they're not going to know what the purpose is going to be. So make sure we communicate that. And ensure that type is congruent with the purpose. So again, if people are coming expecting a input-giving meeting and ends up being lectured to, again, their propensity to come to another one of your meetings is somewhat minimized. Down the line, it's fair to say. So make sure it's congruent with what those expectations are. Foundation and structure, we talked about that, the little pyramid. Plan and prepare. It doesn't just happen naturally. In some cases it does, but for the most part, it doesn't just happen naturally. Critically examine your use of PowerPoint if you use it. Again, there's not a lot of different things you have to do with it. It's just a few tweaks of how we use it. And that last piece that I call the choreography is just our positioning. And I like, that concept you said where we just stand up. Something as simple as that. I'm not saying that's going to work in every scenario, but something like that. Be aware that that can open or close down the communication pathways within a meeting. And at the end of the day, if you don't feel the ROI is going to be worth it, look at other alternatives. Maybe just an email. Maybe, once again, a one-on-one conference call. Whatever it might be, might make more sense. Did I make my time?
Very good.
Thank you. I appreciate your time. Again, I do have, for those that might be interested, I also have a couple of brochures for people that are interested in other services. I'll leave them here for you. But thank you, and have a great rest of your conference.